So good afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is T.L. Hill. I'm the Managing Director of Fox Management Consulting here at Temple University's Fox School of Business and a Professor of Strategy. And I'm joined today by Russell Redding, who's Secretary of Agriculture for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And he's been a dairy farmer, a dean of an agricultural college, and now an agricultural university, and Secretary of Agriculture. And I think there are probably very few people who are as prepared as he is to help us think about our food system, how it's affected by the COVID-19 shock, and looking ahead a little bit, what might happen in the future. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So my first question, Secretary, is how is the pandemic and our response to the pandemic affecting our food supply here in Philadelphia? I know it's a complicated system, so we're going to have enough to eat this summer?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for hosting. Always a pleasure to be with you, and really appreciate the work that was done 2017-18 to help us better understand Pennsylvania agriculture, and I'll reference that a couple of times today. And I think it's just really been, I've gone back to it a couple of times just in the last month to sort of look at the industry and the different sectors and some of the employment numbers that have helped us make some decisions. In terms of the food supply, it is turned on its head now. I mean, we have built these very complicated, interwoven, complex systems to feed us. And they're both local, they're regional, they're the national and international systems. Mm-hmm. And all of that has come to bear over the last month because of the spread of the COVID-19 from China, our largest trading partner. So begin to see slowdowns in supply chains. So we've had a real challenge the last month of managing that system. But it's not a supply and demand issue alone. It has a lot to do with available labor and a lot to do with where we're consuming our food. Prior to COVID-19, half of what we consumed was outside the home, and half was inside. And now we have switched within 30 days to being 100% retail. Right. And just how difficult it is to have the systems that we've built respond to that. So you run into these issues of supply and demand within that context. There's plenty of food. Right. It's just getting it to where we need it has been the challenge.
Right. And is it always the right food? I mean, part of my impression is that, what you might be serving to a school lunchroom or in a restaurant may not be quite what you're buying in the retail store.
Yeah, no, that's part of this as well, because we have seen certainly a change in fresh fruits and vegetables, right? Again, we've built systems to have access, particularly in our schools and institutions and colleges, universities. And with that shut off, what consumers are buying, they're buying a lot of processed food. They're buying some fresh product, but not nearly as much as what we would have consumed, if we were at the normal channels, if you will.
So in some sense, they're buying food from 6 months or a year ago rather than right now. If it's been processed,
yes,
right? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Right.
And farmers plant months out, right? I mean, obviously seasonally months out, but also increasingly they're planning to contracts, and so they've got a sense of what they're going to need, 3 months from now, and now those contracts, I assume, are no longer valid, or in a way.
Well, you have a combination of things happening. Certainly, from a contract standpoint, back to my point about just how interwoven the system is. So, what's happening in the southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere, that we've built these systems to complement where we buy food and when we buy certain foods from certain parts of the world. And what has been revealed here in the last month is that system is now sort of also complicated because of interruption of COVID-19, but also interrupted by the business practices and the buying habits that we are undertaking or having to undertake now as part of the COVID-19. But to your point about the seasons and planting, that's one of the issues right now. And if you talk to the farm community, they're saying, well, what should I do? Yeah. Right? I know what I would normally do, But given the markets and the instability of these markets, should we be doing something different? And it's a great question. The problem is you don't have time to plan for it. You're going to have to make some gut decisions here, and I think most folks will try to stay the course, at least on production. What will change certainly is marketing.
So can you talk a little bit about, because you talked about how complicated the system is, can you help us understand in more concrete terms, maybe a couple of examples of something that I might not think about that's part of the larger food system that might have been affected by COVID-19? So you talked about labor.
Use dairy.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it 2 points. One is on a dairy industry. It's the largest segment of Pennsylvania agriculture. 30% of our gross farm income is out of the dairy industry. So it has a lot to say about the health and stability of Pennsylvania agriculture. Just that particular industry in 30 days, it went from probably the best prices we were seeing in 4 years to now the lowest prices we will have seen in 15 years, all in 30 days, right? Not a single thing that the farmer has done is the problem. It's a system. And all of this product, because half of that milk consumption is done out of the home through the pizza, right? It's all the cheese, it's all of those types of products. That is shut off. So now you've got the supply chain where what are we doing? We're dumping milk. At the same time, we've got more people in unemployment and more need of food assistance than ever. And in there is our dilemma of this dichotomy of too much and not enough. Right. And that's one experience. The other is just on labor. And I think if there's a story here of what has happened both to the critical workers you hear so much about, is that what they've had to do to go out and work, even when everybody else is sort of sheltered in and required to shelter in, and they have to go out. They have to be exposed. So the protections we offer to that group of workers, whether they're grocery store workers or the meat packers, absolutely critical. And we've had issues there of both, the interest and concern of those individuals balanced against this life-sustaining business that we have to sort of sustain. Right. And that's created some real workforce issues for us.
Yeah, I think wasn't the one of the Hazleton plants was just closed in for meat processing just the other day because they have something like 20% COVID positive now. And
so Cargill, it was a Cargill plant, 800 employees. A high percentage of folks either were high risk and stepped away, or it became positive, or those in the plant became exposed to the positive. Right. And it quickly unraveled. Right, to the point where you couldn't run the plant, so they shut it down for several weeks.
Yeah, so it's a complex system, but also in some sense, weirdly a fragile system, in the sense that everything is so interdependent that you pull one little piece out and it freezes up, it seems like.
It's as stable as it appears and appreciative as we are of it. I think it's delivered on its promise. The problem is it's predicated on all of these little pieces sort of working in tandem with each other that allows for that system to really function. And there are places along the way here where that has not been as smooth, either on the trucking side, the regulatory side, state decisions that are made miles, hundreds of miles away have implications for our supply chain. And these are the things that we've had to manage over the last couple of weeks.
So with that managing, I mean, obviously we're not just giving up here, right? We're trying to figure out how to adjust the system, and the system to some degree will adjust itself. But what have you been doing to, I think that's a very stark thing. We got too much food on the one hand and not enough food on the other hand. What's some of the steps that we're doing to try to bridge that gap?
Well, I think there are a couple of things we're doing. One is, I think in the governor's sort of declaration of making sure that the industry was defined as critical and life-sustaining was an important step, right? Because it was both a signal to the industry that we need you and you need to continue to function. It was also a very important public statement of reassurance to the public about the adequacy and the predictability of that food supply. So I think that was an important statement on the front side. Secondly, making sure that inside the definition of agriculture, this is where I go back to, the work that you did on the Ag Impact Study, understanding the components of the industry, that it's not simply about farm, but there's this very intricately woven supply chain that's got to be considered both in terms of our policies, but also in terms of the workers and the workforce and other considerations. So you see a lot of that embedded in our very first guidance document that talked about agriculture and defined it, the industry at large. And I think, again, I credit the work done at Fox to help us do that. On top of that, one of the revelations here is that as proud as we are of agriculture in the state, there's things we can do. There's also a lot of things that our federal government has to do, whether it's the motor carrier weight limits, or if it's the critical infrastructure from Homeland Security, if it's the food policy allowances for inspection, or our charitable food system. So we've done a lot of those things to make sure that we can continue to operate as an industry, but at the same time make sure that we're very rapid in our response to the charitable food system in the state that has seen extraordinary surge because of the number of folks, of course, on unemployment. So we've done a lot to make sure that people are safe, that they're fed, that the industry of agriculture is continuing, at least, able to continue to operate. There's been a lot of different decisions made to do that.
Yeah, no, it sounds incredibly complicated. It doesn't sound like you're sleeping much either.
No.
Or at least, farmers are pretty famously philosophical and adaptable. And I imagine that during this time, even though this complicated system is in some ways, creaking, maybe broken in parts, that there's beginning to be some adaptation, some innovation. Do you see any new glimmers of a new way of doing things that might actually outlive the crisis? Is it even too early to ask that question?
No, I think it's just based on the experiences of the last 3 weeks. There's a couple of things that have appeared. We were looking at this diversification issue on farms. It was one of the recommendations that came out of the Ag Impact Study, and we've spent a lot of time with the Farm Bill, sort of, trying to accelerate that by investment last year as part of our budget that became really, important in the program and the policy work that we were doing. And I'm so glad that we have that infusion, because it helped to sort of, to create sort of opportunities for direct markets, the branding of the state, the investments in processing, the opportunities for direct markets. So we had a lot of producers that I think were on the fence whether they would diversify. I think now they're looking at it, do you really want to have all of your income derived from dairy, as an example?
Right.
Do you want to do some home delivery, which has been sort of we've seen this increase the last couple of weeks in folks interested in home delivery. I think the silver lining in this disaster is the rediscovery of who is feeding us. And that becoming a really important part of the narrative. And I don't think that's just by the COVID crisis. I think that's sustainable. And this surge that we've seen, I think, is going to be there, because folks are going to want to have diversification, number one. But two is, I think this public wants to know, where is my food coming from? And there's this reawakening that has occurred in a couple of different sectors. And in terms of timing the season, I think for a lot of producers looking at, the time is now if you want to do a CSA. The time is now to decide whether you want to do organic. The time is now if you want to start looking at, refinance and thinking hard about the income stream. So in some respects, as painful as the pandemic is, there are some things that I think will sustain will sustain long beyond the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's really interesting because that's something that's becoming. You're only the fourth person in this series, but it's already becoming a little bit of a theme that systemic changes that were underway before the pandemic seem to be accelerated by the pandemic. And so this sense, people have been beginning to worry more and more about where's my food come from? Can you show me the field? Can you show me the cow?
Right.
Having that now be accelerated and farmers thinking, in both directions, production farmers thinking maybe I need to have a little bit more direct sales. And some of the direct sale farmers, some of the work we did for Chester County, they were realizing that direct sale, just that is also a risk, that they better have a few wholesalers as well. This idea of diversification sounds like maybe, as you said, it's moving from the edges more towards the center because it makes sense.
But it does make sense. And I think what the changes in our sort of business plans and the marketing plans and those opportunities that have been created by the COVID-19 are all good things. One of the other revelations has been the inadequacy of broadband and e-commerce. And I think that's
in rural areas in particular, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those issues where we've been talking about broadband for years. And as our federal government talks about infrastructure, I would put that at the very top of the list when you look at what's happened to the educational system. Part of the issue that we had to confront in Pennsylvania with our decision about schools was about somebody having access. Could the student have access? Extend that out to the farm. If we want to talk about direct market and sales, you're going to have access, right? So the systemic changes are driven as much by technology and access to that as they are out of the consumer habits of desiring local product.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The sort of the hidden complexity here is one of the themes that also may be coming up. That what looks like a fairly simple, just sell direct, actually has underneath it all kinds of infrastructure implications, new business model implications, new ways of actually doing the production. So it's a complicated change. We're pretty much done the recorded part. I was wondering if there's one final thought you want to leave us with as we sort of look ahead. If you're going to make a recommendation for somebody interested in supporting the agricultural system, looking ahead, what can we do to come out of this stronger?
I would say two things. One is, we've had a lot of questions about the safety of the food system, the food and the food system. What is clear to me, as stressed as it has been, it has continued to deliver, right? And I think we ought to be proud of that and take a lot of comfort in. It's not about being in short supply. It really is the strength of that system built that allows it to respond as it has, and to make the types of changes that we've asked it to make. Imperfect for sure, but it really hasn't disappointed us. And I think that's an important statement. Two is, I think we always need to be looking at recovery and making sure that these experiences that we have had the last couple of weeks and the things that we've talked about today become part of our recovery plan, like the technology, looking hard at the relationship between consumer and producer, and not allowing the crisis to sort of to end, if you will, and lose that relationship that I think people they've wanted for a long time, and this has been forced upon them through this crisis. We need to continue that. And if there's one important thing that consumers can do, is to make an intentional buying decision about supporting the local economy, whether that's on Main Street, right, or if it's in the agricultural, to know where is this product coming from. And if you like it, express that.
Right.
And thank the folks who are making it happen. So I don't want that moment to sort of get away from us, to keep agriculture here, because it really is a chance to recenter and refocus. Part of our brand, but it's also part of the future of agriculture, is that local, sustainable connectedness that we really desperately want and need for the future of agriculture in Pennsylvania.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.